Hello, beautiful people. So today's message is about loss is a lie and death is an illusion. So what does this mean? Well, loss is a lie as in whenever we experience the death of our loved ones, we feel there's a significant loss, but in actual truth, I do not believe there is a loss. The loss perhaps is the physical body that is no longer here, yes, that has gone. But the loss in as such as the soul that has passed over has not been lost to us. In actual fact, it's a completely different connection. The soul lives on. And so that then speaks to how death is an illusion. Because we do not die. Our soul transitions into the afterlife. And so that's what I want to talk about today on a couple of different aspects, including our journey as soul in this human body and why we are here. Why are we here as soul in a human body? For most of us, we have believed that we live up to 100 years of age if we get that far, and then we die. But that death is an illusion. The soul never dies, it transitions into the afterlife. And so for us to think or even fear death, what are we actually fearing? So I want to talk a little bit about how death, dying, and grief is just been another form of programming that we've all been led to believe. That loss is that grief and the death of our loved ones is a form of loss, which is not true. And that death is something to be feared. And that's a big one because I really struggle, I guess, not struggle, cancel, clear, delete that. I have a challenge to get people to communicate around death and dying. No one wants to talk about it, but it's also causing a lot of problems when we face mortality. So many problems that don't need to be there, that can be prevented. So loss is a lie and death is an illusion. Well, my role is to break this myth or these illusions, to shatter these illusions and break the silence of death and dying. So ultimately grief is less devastating. Because grief should not be a devastating experience. And there's one very significant reason for this that came up for me many years ago. And it was actually someone else communicated this. I heard very briefly, not as a topic on this, but it just came out in conversation, exactly what I experienced many years ago. And so I also want to communicate on the importance of why we need to be, or why we're here as soul. Because in truth, we're here to prepare. This is not the ultimate life in this physical existence now. This life is in actual preparation for the transition into, the afterlife. That's the life that we should be preparing for. And so I want to talk about that. How do we do that? my understandings around that. So it means we must live fully present in the now moment, embracing all of our experiences, to embrace our experience of joy, happiness, and love, but most importantly, to embrace our experiences of challenge. Why? Because that is where we have this most significant soul growth, where we raise our level of consciousness, our level of awareness in this existence of life. We move through, when we're able to embrace our challenges and see them as gifts of opportunity, as a moment of divine intervention, so to speak, to be able to step into a higher authentic part or authentic way of being, our most authentic self, continually learning to step into and embody our most authentic self. Why? Because what I understand through our challenges is those challenges that we move through that are very uncomfortable are our mini deaths, the mini deaths leading us to the ultimate death. So the ultimate death, or the transition when we take our last breath, is being able to be in the highest level or state of consciousness, which is peace and love, so that our transition is as smooth as possible as we go through the little passage into the afterlife. So this part is the part that not many still fully understand, and it may not be your truth, and that's okay. But what is your truth? So I feel the real death that we experience is in each present moment when we're moving through our challenging experiences, as we shed and let go of the limited self so that we can embody our most authentic self, which is connected to love, not connected to fear. And so these experiences that do and can feel like losses, many losses in life, the relationships, our careers, can be anything, the materialism, loss of homes, and all sorts of things. All of these experiences bring us back to our most authentic self, which is heart connectedness, consciousness, not attached to fear, that we can be in this world and be okay to lose our car, to lose our home, to lose, not that we lose, to be okay with the death of our loved ones, to remain connected to love. And so these are the opportunities where we grow in higher wisdom, compassion, and forgiveness for ourselves and all others. And each time we grow, heal, and evolve and raise our awareness into the truth of who we are, deeper unconditional love for all of life and forgiveness, and greater levels of compassion are revealed. But what I found was also a very high level of gratitude felt for these experiences that we move through. Because when we receive the wisdom learnings, that enables us to be so grateful, because it allows us through those wisdom learnings to think, oh my gosh, if I didn't actually go through this experience, I would not have seen that. This would not have happened. I would not be in this higher state of love and peace. And you become extremely grateful, and that there dissolves the pain that we feel in that experience. How do I know this? Well, I want to share a bit of my personal experience. This has actually been hard for me in the sense I started communicating this level of gratitude that I had for my experience with the death of my son through suicide loss as a bereaved mother. I actually reached a state of gratitude for the experience because I was actually moving through, I was actually walking, it was my most profound spiritual awakening. And so because of that, I had so much growth as a person that would not have happened, could have happened a different way, but it happened through the experience that I moved through with the death of my son. Now, I never always felt grateful for that experience. That's the truth. But there's a couple of things that happened in that experience. One was I heard that my suffering and pain was actually keeping my son bound from fully transitioning. I didn't understand that at the time. And the other part was that in time, through my desire to understand the afterlife and why we are here as humans, because it can't be just this. One moment my son's here and the next he's gone. That didn't make sense to me. And so I was so desiring to understand the afterlife. Where do we go? But what I heard in my depths of devastation, the dark night of the soul, is that was actually my inability at the time to reconnect to life was actually keeping him stuck. And I thought, holy cow, knowing what I was feeling with the devastation and the pain, the sheer utter stripping of my identity that I had created for myself, I no way in the world would even wish that upon a worst enemy, so to speak, as the saying goes. Let alone if I thought that my pain and my inability was keeping him stuck from fully transitioning, then that was not okay. And so that was my one little, all right, somehow, I didn't know how, but I knew I had to reconnect to life. So that's just one experience that came to me, and I now understand is extremely important that all of us who experience the death of our loved ones, there comes a time that we must reconnect to life and live our life. And I did. But also what I moved into in time was an absolute place of gratitude for my experience. And I started actually communicating this in the early days with my grief counselling. And I found that it was shocking to most people that I was supporting And it made me reflect even deeper. Why do I feel this way? Why do I feel grateful? And I realized that I was grateful because of my wisdom learnings through the experience of death and dying and grief, that my profound growth and evolution in consciousness for where I was able to move into, progress to, that resulted in absolute peace and a sense of freedom. Then I've actually moved into so much more peace and freedom 9 years on since that moment, that I started to realize, if I can experience this absolute peace for my experience, why can't all of humanity feel this? Why are we remaining in this devastation of loss, thinking we have lost something, lost our loved ones? Because I know that's not true. How? How do I know that's not true? Because how could I be having my experiences now with my son communicating with me, who is actual guide for me on my path? And I know that is true for many children that cross over, become spiritual guides for their parents. And so that connection is not made up in my head. I'm not the only one that has profound connection into and with all these other beings, because my path started opening up with my connection to not just my son. So how could this be? So loss is a lie. So this one realization, as I then continued to deeply reflect, I stopped communicating around it because it seemed to bother people. People that were grieving said, there's no way that you can be grateful for such an experience. And that might be so for them, but it's a choice. That's a choice right there, to remain in suffering and not continue to live your life, or to embrace that experience and reconnect to life and rebirth into a higher version of yourself, your most authentic self. And that's what I have done and continue to do. Loss is a lie, because my son has not gone anywhere. If anything, we are profoundly, energetically connected. So this one realization showed me one thing about that experience, but not only that experience. What it taught me, what I realized, was I never lost my connection to love. Now, it wasn't just in that one experience, because as with the death of our loved ones, many traumas can surface, as it did for me. And I found I was actually moving through so much unresolved trauma. And I realized I could see all the way through my life through all of my experiences that I at the time deemed were hurtful to me, but what I saw reflected over my whole life is I never lost my connection to love. I realized the truth of who I am. It was revealed to me, the soul group that I came from, the loving ones, and that I am unconditional love. And it made so much sense to me. And so the journey of the soul, discovering this and realizing that all of these experiences are our mini deaths. Mini deaths of the limited self. That's the real death, because it is uncomfortable. I did go through a death. That wasn't an illusion, because I felt all the pain. I felt everything that it brought up within me that was of lack consciousness somewhere, whether it was unworthiness or feeling devalued or not enough, which are the common ones for all of us. And I began to release all of these limitations. And so the journey of the soul in this now moment, in this life as a human, why are we here? As I was so yearning to understand, is to keep growing and evolving through our experiences and go through these mini deaths of the ego, which is an important part, the most important part to our life, our journey in each moment. Our challenges are our gifts of opportunity to step into profound realization, self-realization of the truth of who you are. And so why do we need to do this? Because it's preparing us for our rebirth into the important life, the afterlife. That's why I'm here, to help lead people through the everyday moments so they can be empowered in and anchored into their most authentic self. It is through your experience of death and grieving is how we connect. That connects us. That's the shared experience that I communicate to you, to help plant the seeds so you can find your truth. And so the rebirth into the next life, what that rebirth looks like, my understanding is these mini deaths each time raises us up into a higher level of consciousness. So when we're transitioning, my understanding is that transition, when we leave the body, when the soul or the spirit leaves the body and transitions into the afterlife and rebirths, we want to go through that transition through a state of peace, calm, and pure love, and not fear. And so I feel we have been programmed just in this one space around death, dying, and grief, so that we have a more limited potential for a peaceful transition into the afterlife. That's how I see it. This is what I believe I'm here to communicate to and help bring awareness to. Why have we been programmed? On so many levels. This is all coming to the surface now. This is just my area, my unique space. Especially my bereavement mentorship. I've written a spiritual program, which is so profound what I've created, but it's to help people walk the path of spirituality. So why have we been programmed? Why could this be so? Well, if we've been programmed to fear death, it's keeping us stuck in this low density consciousness. We're connected to fear and we're not connected to love, which means we're not connected to our heart. So what if we've been programmed to fear death, to limit this potential of the soul's ability to transition into the afterlife? Doesn't mean we won't transition, but my understanding is we go through this passage. Perhaps the passage is where we have the life review. And in this passage, it could be very uncomfortable because of the density that we are still in, which is fear. Or it could be a smoother transition, because I believe we'll all make it to the afterlife, but it's this passage that I'm still learning about, where it could be very bumpy and uncomfortable, or it could be nice, smooth transition. What's the worst? Why would we be programmed to be in fear? To limit this potential, perhaps to cross over. What do you think? Why would we be encouraged, programmed for that not to happen, perhaps? How many of us fear death? What are we fearing? The unknown. I guess we'll never exactly know. But we have to question, why are we being encouraged to fear this? Why are we continually being fed, I guess, stories that keep us disconnected from love, disconnected from our heart selves, our multi-dimensional self? Why? So why is this important? Well, I believe all of this programming on all levels, whether it's through governments and institutions and pharma and if you just look at all of these experiences that we have with all of these so-called services, why So like for pharma, for example, keeping us in this density, relying on all these medications and stuff, fearing that if we don't take certain things that, you know, we're going to be worse off. There's so much like fear stories in, if we don't do this, then we're not going to have a fulfilled life. But if you actually have a look at it, none of that is fulfilling. So why is this fear-mongering? The story. What is it keeping us from, and why? Because when we realize the power of who we are as soul, we don't need any of those services, which is connected to power, money, and greed. I see it even in my space where the power and the money and the greed is. The false stories told to everybody that we must go to funeral homes, for example, to be buried, spending thousands upon thousands of dollars, when you don't need to do any of that. We need to go to aged care facilities and hand over all of our assets to be in these aged care facilities, so that you can die. Like, when are we going to realize that these stories, whether it's in the space of death, dying, and grief, is all an illusion, the fear surrounding it? When are each of us going to start to ask the questions of what is the truth here? And why would they be doing that? It's to disconnect us from our soul self, to disconnect us from love. So the afterlife, one thing that I have learnt or continue to learn and witness is how important and sacred the transition into the afterlife is. It's a rite of passage that we need to prepare for in our everyday life. Not in the future, not in the past, but in the present moment, with how we live our life. And ultimately, learning to disconnect from all fear, wherever it shows up in your life, and always remain connected to love, no matter what. Loss is a lie. Death is an illusion. And so in this video, I hope to encourage, perhaps if you're moving through grief and loss, how can you connect to love through your experience? Let go of the fear, that loss, that you have lost something. Let go of the suffering, one, so you can reconnect to life, and so that perhaps your loved one can transition. And when you let go of the suffering and the fear connected to, and the devastation connected to the death of a loved one, you will open yourself to intuitive abilities to connect and commune with your loved one on an energetic level that is so profound, because you have the most beautiful spiritual soul protector guiding you every single of the day. And perhaps you might be someone moving through facing mortality at the moment. How can you embrace the last moments of your life as a human, as soul in this human body, and live every moment to the maximum potential in the highest state of consciousness and love? Even if you only have 2 days left, how can you live that? Embrace that, rather than in, I only have 2 days to live, and feeling sorry for ourselves. And I can understand why we would feel that, because there is a loss of life, as in maybe life has been cut short for you. But how can you embrace it? Perhaps forgive any grievances that maybe took place in your life with any loved ones. Make peace with that. Find forgiveness for what does not feel okay, perhaps in this now moment. And embrace with absolute love, so you can transition with ease, grace, and in a state of peacefulness. And perhaps you're just moving through adversity in life. How can we reframe how we look at adversity and see it as a gift, as an opportunity? It's a divine intervention. Normally when it's a big upheaval in our lives, it's a kick up the bum. I feel like Spirit gave me the kick up the bum as an old soul to wake up and step into what I came here to contribute towards, which is helping co-create this new earth that is unfolding around us. How can we embrace our challenges every time they come up, so we remain connected to love? And as a message for all of us, where through all of our experiences can we remain open to learning the wisdom that has been presented to us, the opportunity to heal, to grow, to evolve and become our most authentic selves. So loss is a lie. Death is an illusion. What is your truth? I hope this encourages you to dig deep in self-inquiry, to understand what your truth is. With the life and the world that is dismantling around us, we must have dysfunction to be able to reach function, and that's what's happening. Choose to remain connected to love. Don't buy into the fear-mongering, because that's just keeping you limited. You're far greater than that. Trust me, you are so far greater. Even if you don't understand it, you are. Allow your soul to lead you and bring you home to the truth of who you are. Namaste.